our notable speaker, Sheikh Hamza, who will be giving us a talk today on radical Muslims. Sheikh Hamza graduated from the University of Washington in 2004 with a bachelor's degree in biochemistry and Near Eastern languages and civilizations. During his time here, he served as president of the IAW Muslim Students Association. After graduating, Sheikh Hamza went on to pursue traditional Islamic studies, which took him across the globe to countries like Egypt, Morocco, and Pakistan, just to name a few. After returning to the States, he spent 5 years as the resident scholar of the Bar Institute and worked closely with a number of nonprofit organizations in the Seattle area. In 2012, Sheikh Hamza accepted the position of Assistant Director of Darul Qasim in Glen Ellen, Illinois, where he currently resides. Please help me in welcoming Sheikh Hamza.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Inshallah, it's interesting to be back. The hub is very different than I remember it being. It's nice to be back in Seattle. A year in Chicago has caused me to appreciate how wonderful of a place Seattle is. You have to understand it's very stressful when you finish drinking a can of something and you ask where is the recycle bin, and then you realize with horror there is no recycle bin. So that's that. And I have very fond memories of my time at the University of Washington, although I feel old when I realize how long ago it was. Very few people that I used to know at that time aren't here anymore, but it's still a wonderful place to be, and it's a wonderful time of life for those of you who are studying here, so take full advantage of it. For those of you who may not have been able to decode some of the things in the introduction, the Thor Institute was a seminary project that didn't quite get off the ground. Darul Qasim, where I'm the assistant director, is also a seminary. The Muslim community in America is in its very, you could say, infant stages compared to perhaps Judaism or other minority religious communities. And so it's kind of an interesting time to be a Muslim in America in the sense that you have a lot of communities that are trying to reconcile their disparate kind of ethnic, religious, cultural traditions with the context they find themselves in right now. And the hope is that this is a positive, small piece of the effort to achieve that reconciliation. This talk, as well as your attending it, be you Muslim or non-Muslim, or a member of the MSA or someone from the general public. The topic I was given to talk about is radical Muslims. I have 2 degrees from the University of Washington. One is a degree in biochemistry, and one is a degree in Near Eastern languages. From the biochemistry side of things, when you think about a radical, what are you talking about? You're thinking about something that has like a lone electron where it should be a pair. So it will literally just go, you'll have this one messed up particle, and it will go and mess up another particle, and that will go and mess up another particle. And you have this kind of chain propagating step by which a small amount of reagent will cause havoc, it will wreak havoc in large systems. This is very similar to what we conceive of in terms of people. There are certain people like that. They will wreak havoc in systems, and that's what we talk about when we say radical Islam and radical Muslims. I first of all encourage people to make a differentiation between radical or fanatical Islam and fundamentalist Islam. The term fundamentalism, although it carries its own connotations, is generally viewed as a negative thing, but we are people in university, so we should look at things from a more academic point of view. Fundamentalism is the belief in a religious tradition, for the context of this talk, that stems from a devotion and a very heartfelt conviction that the religion that one claims to adhere to is true, that its revealed books contain truth in them, that God exists, and what the beliefs of the religion are more than merely rituals or cultural artifacts of a different age. Rather, they are a true and a valuable means to achieve not only a better life in this world, but reaching some sort of otherworldly or super metaphysical realities and attainments that are to be achieved by a person that transcend the material life of this world. So we want to differentiate between those two things, and I wanted to talk about the differentiation between these two things. I was asked before going on to talk about my topic in specific to give a very brief rundown about what Islam is, as this is the first talk in the Islam Awareness Week, and there may be people who are not so familiar with the Muslim tradition. So Islam is a very simple religion. It's founded on the belief that there's one God alone, without any partner, no one's like unto him, and that he communicates with his creation. He had a purpose in creating his creation, and that purpose is in us fulfilling our lives and reaching some sort of state that's different than the state that we come into this world. That every single other part of the creation of God extols and praises and worships God in its own way, out of jabar, out of duress and force. But this is a creation, their unique way of fitting into the scheme of God's creation is what? Is that we're the only ones who are not forced to worship him. And so the purpose of this creation is that there are certain people from amongst this creation that will recognize and know God for who he is and worship him because he deserves to be worshipped, and love him because he deserves to be loved. And that's what the gist of Islam is that you're trying to attain that. So you believe in one God, you believe in communication between this one transcendent God who created the heavens and the earth. And this is not an irrational concept, this is a rational concept. The old philosophers, there were theistic philosophers and materialist philosophers. I dislike the term atheism because atheism doesn't tell what a person believes in, it tells what they don't believe in. Right? Atheism is no God, right? It tells what they don't believe in. I think that the actual more precise nomenclature that should be used is philosophers that believe in God and the external creator, and materialist philosophers. Materialism, why? Because that's the belief that the universe existed forever because it has no need for a creator. It exists in cycles that self-perpetuate themselves. And so for a person to say, how can you believe in God? It's so irrational because you can't see, touch, hear him, etc., etc. This is a philosophy called empiricism. And empiricism has its limits because there are many things that are useful for us in our daily lives that have very practical benefits that empirically you cannot demonstrate. Absolute zero, right? I'm going to science mode again, right? The thermodynamics, right? The idea of entropy and about perfect crystalline states at absolute zero. Absolute zero is a completely theoretical concept. It's not something that actually you can say, okay, yeah, I have something at absolute zero inside this vial or inside this lab. The concept of the number zero itself, also, how can you point to something and say that's zero? The square root of -1, etc., etc. There are so many concepts that are not something you can see, feel, and touch, but it doesn't negate their validity. So the idea of theistic philosophy is what? Is that the universe, it's unreasonable to believe the universe perpetuates itself because nothing in the material world perpetuates itself. Everything requires some external cause and effect. So I don't want to get into the philosophy too much, but that's the worldview, the cosmology, that such a creator exists, that creator communicates with his creation, and human beings being the creation that are given free will have a choice. You can either be a good person, which there's someone who, many people who will tell you in great deal what that means, but we'll summarize by saying you can either be a good person or you can be a bad person, and there's a lot of great deal of detail that someone can explain that to you in as well. And the good people will be rewarded by God at the end of their life, and the bad people will be punished, and there's individual judgment that everyone has to go through. And this is a very, very brief summary of what the belief of Islam is. So this brings us to radical Islam. Rad, because there's a picture of it's really witty, whoever designed the poster. It's a picture of a guy in Gulf Arab attire, like skateboarding at the side of a wall. I don't know who designed it, but I thought it was very witty. So it's supposed to look like rad, like in the surfer, skater sense of the word. But to be much more serious, given the reality that we live in after 9/11. I know many of the students here may have been much younger at that time, but we were in university at that time. It was a real shock. Living in America has not been the same since then. I was born and raised here. It was a different America before that. It's a different America now. Some people may not feel that because they have only experienced the second different type of America, but it's definitely different. And it's a reality that the waves and ripples of which they keep hitting us from time to time. Unfortunately, the most recent time that the kind of shock waves from that new reality have hit us were with the bombings of the Boston Marathon, where I now read newspaper clippings and newspaper articles that, ridiculous things like today, a Saudi student was traveling carrying a pressure cooker. And so he was asked a question about it, and because he didn't answer the question consistently, he was put in some sort of confinement or whatever. So now, we've devolved to this. I mean, it's a very serious subject, but it almost takes on a kind of ridiculous and like a comical quality that now all of a sudden you have civilizations and systems of philosophy and thought and centuries of culture and tradition devolving down to what? To people's sensitivity regarding pressure cookers. This is something that's it's very lamentable to say the least. So I wanted to cut to the chase. MashaAllah, you have many people who will come on TV and tell you Islam is peace and Islam is love and Islam is wonderful in the Muslim community. Repudiates terrorism. Obviously, if you're watching a different TV channel, that we don't want to take names or anything, but they may tell you where are the Muslim voices condemning terrorism. Those people obviously don't know how to read and don't know how to hear things because, mashallah, every Muslim organization I've been a part of, from being in America to studying at very cracked fundamentalist institutions by many standards all throughout Africa and Asia, all of them condemn the indiscriminate violence and killing of innocent people. There are condemnations, but still the lingering thought, is there in the minds of many people to whom the Muslim tradition is not something that they're very familiar with. And that lingering thought was personified by an encounter I've had with a carpenter from Bellingham on an airplane ride from Seattle to, I think, the Bay Area. I travel quite often. I have a platinum membership on American Airlines. I'm a frequent flyer, and I always travel dressed like this. I don't go into undercover Muslim mode, which, despite the encouragement of many well-meaning uncles and aunties, it's not something that I want to do or I feel the need to do. So when I sit on a plane, naturally there are always people who are, to say the least, they're a little bit tense or a little bit anxious. And so I try to take time to speak to the people around me. And so I spoke to this carpenter from Bellingham on the flight. And so kind of going on in the conversation, halfway through the conversation, he says, this is wonderful, it's nice talking to you, this, that, and the other thing. You're a Muslim, right? I said, yes, I'm a Muslim. Can I ask you a question? You won't be offended? I said, of course, why not? Ask me whatever you like. He said, it's nice sitting and talking to you and everything, but the whole part in the Quran where it says to kill all the infidels. Mind you, before 9/11, the only time I've ever heard the term infidel being used was in relation to Catholic, in specific and in general Christian theology. There's a part in the Quran where it says to kill all the infidels. How can you guys justify that? I said, listen, friend, I said, you've been watching too much of the same TV channel we alluded to before. I said, Iraq had a 10% Christian population before the American invasion unseated them. That was a population that survived 1,300 years of Islamic theocracy. Syria has a 30% Christian population. Lebanon has a 40% Christian population. Egypt has a 10% Christian population. Palestine has a 35% Christian population. So many countries in the heart of the Muslim world have these large and sizable and vibrant minority communities. I said, do you think that Muslims, people like me, take the Quran seriously? He says, yes, I think you take it that seriously. I said, relax, man. If our Quran told us to kill the infidels, we would have gotten rid of you guys a long time ago. And so It was obviously, in retrospect, it's kind of a horrible thing to say, but it was meant to be somewhat of a joke, and he understood that, he took that as a joke, and I think that's a good point to start with, ponder over that the Muslims have a tradition that doesn't have this idea of totally annihilating your enemies. This idea of total war, I think, is, at least to our tradition classically, it's an alien concept. The idea of fighting a war, such a war that's personified perhaps by the biblical war of the Israelites against the Amalekites, which is total war. Kill them, kill their men, women, children, kill their livestock, salt the earth so that nothing grows in the land anymore. This is a war which is alien to them, and it's alien to most traditional cultures. It's even alien to the Western tradition, except for in the time of modernity, where you have situations like the Civil War, where the North has overwhelming force that they're putting against the South. The South has very brilliant generals and good tactics and whatnot, but they're outnumbered, outmanned, outgunned in every battle. But there's a lack of will on the part of the North to rout Southern armies because of a kind of decent and normal humanity that people have for each other, which is compounded by the fact that these are people from the same race, culture, families, ethnic backgrounds, linguistical heritage, religious heritage, and it's very difficult to go that extra mile and mow an army down. And military success lies in routing an army, not in defeating them in battle. Until what? Until you have Ulysses Grant and William Tecumseh Sherman, who take over the fight for the North, and they say what? They burn Atlanta. They do things like that. They will rout the Southern armies one by one until they have this overwhelming force, which causes the Civil War to come to a very abrupt halt. This concept is something that is alien to most, I think, traditional cultures, at least as of late antiquity. What's before that, I really can't say. But as of late antiquity, this kind of total warfare, it's not something that is something that most traditional cultures will condone. It's not something that most human beings will condone. And I will tell you textually, it's not something that's borne out by Islamic theology. It's not something that was allowed by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. In fact, quite the opposite. We have very strong textual imperative sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, sayings of his companions, commandments and injunctions in the Quran, which forbid a person from going to total war. So you cannot kill women and children, you cannot kill non-combatants, you cannot kill farmers, you cannot kill religious people, you cannot kill livestock, you cannot uproot trees, you cannot destroy crops, except for in dire necessity in life and death type of situations. And those are exceptions, those are not rules. You cannot go back on your word with another nation state. You cannot declare war as a person against a nation state. A person on his own, when they declare war on a nation state, that person is a criminal, that person is not a combatant or a belligerent to a conflict. These rules are things that you can, in your own research, we don't have time to go through all of them, but these are things that you can go and on your own research find in classical works of fiqh. Don't go and watch TV and learn these things from Daniel Pipes and Steve Emerson and all of these other people who really have these back second-hand agendas, and they're getting paid by people to demonize other Americans for agendas that are very easily uncovered. Rather, if you want to see what the Muslims believe about these things, go and look in their own books, go look in their classical sources, and you'll find all of these things. Rather than go into these rules in detail, which we don't have the time for, I would like to quote one verse from the Quran, which summarizes all of these things. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لا يجرمنكم شنآن قوم على ألا تعدلوا اعدلوا هو أقرب للتقوى. This is a verse of the Quran that used to hang for several years in the door of the MSA office in sub-basement. Now the office, I guess, has changed, and there's really very little. I just went and checked it out earlier. There's very little from the old office that I recognize, nothing at all, in fact. But this verse is, what does it say? It says what? It says Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's an injunction, direct injunction from the divine, that first applies to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and then to the community of Islam, that do not let the people who you hate turn you into such criminals that you stop having justice and you stop observing limits with your dealings with them. لا يجرمنكم. Do not let them turn you into such criminals that you do not observe justice and you do not observe limits. Because this is a concept in the kind of philosophical underpinning of Islam, that intellect and good conduct and good character is based on restraint. It's based on observing hudud, on observing limits. That there's a limit to everything. The mind has a limit, the tongue has a limit, the limbs have limits. There's limits that they do not cross. The person who can restrain and confine themselves inside those limits, that person will be successful as a human being. It's not the idea of, shoot for the stars, land on the moon, go as far as you can. Because that has its appeal, but the classical wisdom tradition-based understanding of Islam is that the person who can control themselves, that person is the one who is going to have a good life. It's a model based on balance, not a model based on unchecked growth, which is a model that the latter model has its appeal also, but it's what's giving us these kind of, frankly ridiculous